Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy this kind of content, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel more than you think. Please leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Your interaction helps these stories reach more people. Thank you for being here. I'm going to tell you something I've never put in an official report. And I'm not telling it because I want sympathy, or because I'm trying to scare anyone for fun. I'm telling it because the older I get, the more I understand that silence is part of how these things survive. And I've done enough years in uniform to know the difference between the kind of silence that keeps people calm, and the kind that keeps people controlled. I've worked as a backcountry ranger in the northern end of the state for a little over 11 years. That's federal land for part of it, state forest for part of it, and a mess of county lines that don't matter once you're 10 miles from pavement, and your radio is nothing but a hiss. My district is mostly mountains and birch stands and old logging roads that never made it onto modern maps. You learn the terrain by heart out there. Not because you're romantic about it, but because if you don't, people die. They take the wrong spur, drop into a drainage, and suddenly it's a body recovery instead of a rescue. I'm not a folklore guy. I'm not the ranger who tells campfire stories. I don't collect ghost tales. I don't feel energies. If you put me in a room with someone who starts talking about curses and spirits, my first instinct is to ask what they ate, what they drank, how much sleep they've had, what their oxygen saturation is, and whether they hit their head. I'm the one who checks the weather, checks the topo, checks the timestamps, checks the last known point. That's how you survive in my line of work. Procedures, redundancies, and boring discipline. That's the part that makes what happened in Hollow Creek hard to explain to anyone who hasn't done this job. Because if you haven't lived by protocol long enough to trust it the way you trust gravity, you don't understand the moment when protocol stops working. Not fails because you did something wrong. Not fails because you missed a detail. Fails because the environment you're working in has decided you're not operating under the same rules anymore. Hollow Creek wasn't in my district, technically. On paper, it sat just outside my boundary, in a pocket of county land that used to be a mill town and then wasn't. It had one of those names you see on faded signs with bullet holes in them. The kind of place people claim is up and coming because the property is cheap. The kind of place where someone from the city thinks they can disappear for a month and reset. I'd seen the name on old incident summaries. Most rangers have. Hollow Creek showed up in the winter reports the way a bad smell shows up in a vehicle you can't fully clean. Faint, recurring, never directly addressed. Missing hunters in late December. A hiker who walked out without his boots and never remembered taking them off. A family that swore they heard bells in the middle of a snowstorm when there was no church within 10 miles. Nothing that ever made it into a formal pattern because patterns require data you can trust, and Hollow Creek was a hole in the data. The first time I got personally pulled toward it wasn't through superstition. It was through a normal request, the kind that lands on your desk on a Tuesday and you handle because you're the one on call, and the county dispatcher knows your voice. It was early December when the county sent out a heads up about a rental cabin that kept cycling through short-term tenants. The owner lived out of state. The listing was online. People would arrive, stay a night or two, and leave. A couple left reviews that didn't make sense. Complaints about the air tasting like coins, about no birds, about the town feeling like a museum. Most people wrote it off as winter depression. One person called it a prank town. Another said they felt watched, which is so common in the woods it's not even a red flag by itself. Then, about a week before Christmas, I got a voicemail from a county deputy I'd worked with on a search the previous summer. He wasn't the kind to embellish. He said his name, badge number, and then he said, "Elias, you ever hear of Hollow Creek's compact?" That word, compact, hit my ear wrong immediately. It's a legal term. It's something you sign. It's something that binds parties. It's not something you usually hear in the same sentence as a town that doesn't even have a grocery store anymore. I called him back. He told me, in that flat voice law enforcement uses when they're trying not to sound rattled, that Hollow Creek wasn't doing the usual Christmas stuff. Not a single light. Not a single wreath. No traffic. But the local gas station on the highway had been getting odd customers. People stopping for directions to Hollow Creek and then turning around after a few miles because their GPS died. The deputy said 2 of those people mentioned little shoes on porches and rules. He said it like he hated the sound of it. I told him it sounded like a local tradition used to haze tourists. He didn't disagree. But then he said, "We found somebody last year, or parts of somebody. County buried the report. Sheriff doesn't like it." I asked for the case number. He didn't give it. He just said, "Come out here if you can. Not in uniform. Just come look. I should tell you something about me. I'm not reckless. I'm not the ranger who goes poking around off the books because he wants a story. But I am the kind who takes an unresolved incident personally, because every unresolved incident is a failure in the system, and when you work in public land management long enough, you learn the system has blind spots. People fall through them. Also, I was tired. That's not an excuse, but it's true. I'd been running searches all autumn. We'd had a bad season. Late storms, hypothermia calls, a couple of drownings. When December hit, I was running on fumes. A month in a cabin sounded like the exact kind of decompression I'd recommend to someone else, even though I never take my own advice. That's how I ended up driving toward Hollow Creek with a hand-drawn map on the passenger seat. The GPS signal died about 3 miles outside town. Not drifted, not recalculating. Died. 1 second it had bars. The next it was a dead screen and a spinning icon that never resolved. My phone did the same thing. I tried a ranger band frequency on my handheld radio out of habit. Just static. I tried county dispatch. Nothing but a thin hiss. Dead zones exist. I've worked in plenty. But dead zones have texture. You can usually move 20 yards and catch a bounce off a ridge. You can usually get a weak carrier signal on a high point. This was different. It felt like a door closing. It felt intentional, which is a stupid way to describe radio reception, but that's the only honest word that fits. The road narrowed from 2 lanes to 1.5, then to something that used to be a road. Skeletal birch trees leaned in on both sides, their white bark peeling in long strips like sunburned skin. December had stripped everything bare. The branches clicked against each other with that dry, brittle sound you hear when you step on deadfall. Except I wasn't stepping on anything. The sound was constant, like the forest had teeth and was testing them. I had driven 6 hours from my station. I told myself I was doing a favor for a deputy. I told myself I was scouting for a future jurisdictional partnership. I told myself a lot of things that sounded reasonable. The truth is, somewhere around mile 5 in that dead zone, my instinct started whispering that I'd made a mistake. Not in a dramatic way. Not panic. Just that subtle shift in your gut when you realize the variables have changed and you don't know how. The rental cabin sat at the end of a gravel path that wound through those birches. It was a 2-story salt box with faded green shutters and a sagging porch. Structurally sound, spiritually defeated. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing but gray winter sky. There was no smoke from the chimney. No tire tracks besides mine, no footprints. What struck me immediately was the silence. Not peaceful quiet. Not that clean winter hush you get after fresh snow. This was an absence of sound so complete it made my ears ring. No birds, no insects, no distant traffic, nothing. I've been in remote basins where you can hear your own blood in your ears, but even there you hear something. Wind, a raven, a branch dropping. This was as if somebody had turned the world's volume knob to 0 and left the power on. When I stepped out of the truck, the cold hit me like a physical blow. Not crisp, not sharp. Hollow, dry. The kind of cold that doesn't just chill you, it leaches warmth from your bones like your body owes it a debt. I tasted metal when I inhaled, like sucking on old pennies. Through the trees I could see Hollow Creek itself about a 1/4 mile down the main road. Peaked roofs, a white church steeple, the skeleton of a water tower. 5 days from Christmas and not a single colored bulb, not a single porch light. It looked abandoned, not boarded up abandoned, fossilized abandoned. I hauled my duffel in a hard case with my gear up onto the porch. The key was under a cracked flower pot. That part made me almost laugh. Of course it was. The door opened with a long shriek. Inside smelled like dust and something faintly sweet, like fruit left too long in a bowl. The interior was Spartan. Living room with a stone fireplace, kitchen with yellowed linoleum, bathroom with 1970s fixtures. A narrow staircase to the bedroom. Mismatched furniture. A bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. When I flipped the switch, the light was weak and jaundiced, like it had to fight its way out of the filament. It made the shadows darker by contrast. The radiators clanked but produced only lukewarm heat. The windows were drafty. The floorboards creaked. A persistent dripping somewhere in the walls, like the house had an internal clock made of water. I did what I always do in a new space. I walked it, checked locks, checked windows. Not because I'm paranoid, but because it's routine. Routine keeps you alive. On the second floor, the bedroom looked like it hadn't been updated since somebody thought avocado green was a good idea. There was an attic door at the end of the hallway. A simple hatch with a pull cord, painted the same faded green as the trim. I noticed it and dismissed it. Cabins have attics. That's where you store old blankets and mouse nests. Back downstairs, I set my radio on the kitchen counter and tried it again. Still nothing. I tried my phone. No service. I wrote the time in a small notebook. Habit. December 20th, 3:42 p.m. temperature. Outside. Estimate. Low 20s. Wind. None. That was the other thing. No wind. The birches weren't moving. Their branches clicked anyway. At 3:58 p.m., I heard footsteps on the porch. I wasn't expecting visitors. The rental agreement had stated the property was isolated. A hollow creek was supposed to be a quiet place people forgot. So when I heard the deliberate tread of boots outside, my first instinct wasn't fear. It was evaluation. Who is it? Why are they here? What do they want? Through the window I saw her. A woman in her late 60s, long wool coat gone shiny at the elbows, steel gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight it stretched her face. She carried a large canvas bag that bulged at odd angles. Her expression wasn't friendly. It wasn't hostile either. It was grim determination. Someone doing an unpleasant but necessary task. I opened the door before she could knock. Cold air spilled in. She didn't step forward. "Mrs. Gable," she said, like it was a statement of rank. "You're the man renting the Fairchild place." It wasn't a question. I've been addressed by angry landowners, lost tourists, grieving parents. I know when someone is trying to establish control. This was that. Her pale blue eyes swept over me with a detached assessment, like she was evaluating livestock. "Elias," I said. "Yeah, I'm here for the month. Can I help you?" "I'm not here for introductions." She set the canvas bag down with a heavy thunk. "I'm here because it's my duty. The compact requires it." The way she said compact, capital C in the air, made the back of my neck prickle. Before I could ask what she meant, she reached into the bag and began pulling out objects. Shoes, 13 miniature wooden shoes, each roughly palm-sized. Crude, old, surfaces worn smooth. Some had traces of paint. Red, green, gold. But most had flaked away. They looked like something you'd find in a museum storage drawer or at the bottom of a lake. She arranged them in a precise line along the porch edge. Quick, practiced movements. But her hands were shaking. Not from age. Not from cold. From genuine fear. "Mrs. Gable," I said carefully. "What are these?" "Be quiet." Her voice went hard. "I'll explain once. You'll listen. And you won't interrupt with your city skepticism." She'll corrected her. "I wasn't a city guy. I was a ranger." But the fact she assumed I was an outsider told me what I needed to know. In her mind, it didn't matter what my job was. I was a stranger, a category. So I shut my mouth. She straightened and looked at me with something I can only describe as weary pity. The look you give a condemned person whose fate is already decided. "You've come to Hollow Creek at the worst possible time," she said. "The compact comes due on December 23rd and 24th. Every year. No exceptions." The air on the porch felt like it got heavier. The forest behind her was still. The silence pressed in. "The last renter," she continued. "The Fairchild's nephew. He thought he could ignore the rules." She swallowed, and for the first time I saw her mask slip. Something like nausea flashed across her face. "They found him on Christmas morning." "Who found him?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her eyes snapped to mine. "And what they found," she said, "they buried in pieces." The wind died completely, which should have been impossible because I hadn't felt wind at all. It was just stiller, so silent I could hear my heartbeat. "This is Gable withdrew a piece of parchment from her coat, yellowed with age, covered in cramped fountain pen handwriting. The edges were brittle, stained in places like old water damage, or something else. "These are the rules of the Hollow Creek Compact," she said. "Read them. Memorize them. Follow them exactly. If you fail, the lads will take what they're owed from your flesh." "The lads," I repeated, because my brain was trying to file this under local tradition, and repeating words helps buy time. "You will meet them soon enough." She picked up her empty bag. "The shoes stay on the porch until sunset on the 23rd. Don't touch them. Don't bring them inside." She started to turn, then paused. Her voice lowered. "And for God's sake," she said, "don't leave town. If you try to run, they'll follow you. The compact binds you here until sunrise on the 25th. The practical part of my mind immediately went to legalities. Binding? A lease clause? Some weird local ordinance, but none of that matched the fear in her hands. "I've done my duty," she said without looking back. "What happens next is between you and them. God have mercy on you." Then she walked down the gravel path until the trees swallowed her. I stood on that porch with 13 little wooden shoes lined like a child's game and a piece of parchment that felt too heavy for paper. I should tell you what I did next because it matters. I didn't laugh. I didn't throw the parchment away. I didn't call it nonsense. Not out loud. Inside, yes, part of me wanted to dismiss it as theater. A prank, local tradition to scare renters. But there was a stronger part. The part that has stood over too many fresh tracks in snow that end in nothing. The part that has listened to too many people swear the map changed while they weren't looking. That part didn't dismiss anything. It simply noted, the town is silent, your devices don't work. And a local just performed a ritual with shaking hands like her life depended on it. I read the parchment 3 times. It was titled, in that cramped handwriting, "The Hollow Creek Compact. Rules for the Visiting Stranger. By accepting shelter in Hollow Creek between December 23rd and December 25th, you are bound by the ancient agreement between the township and the 13 lads of Christmas. Failure to honor the compact will result in misfortune. Success will grant the blessing." Then it listed rules. Specific ones. Operational ones. Not poetic. Not metaphorical. Like a checklist. Like a procedure. The shoe offering. Place the 13 wooden shoes on your porch by sunset on December 23rd. Do not touch them again until sunrise on December 25th. Night 1. The Feast of Grease, December 23rd. After sunset, prepare and consume a meal. Do not wash your dishes, pots, or pans. Leave all grease exactly where it lies. The 7 scavengers will arrive after full dark to clean what you've left. Do not interfere. Do not watch. Do not speak to them. If they find insufficient grease on your cookware, they will seek it elsewhere. Stay in your living room until dawn. Night 2. The Night of Breath, December 24th. Before sunset, burn sage in every room. Plug every gap beneath doors with cloth soaked in salt water. The 6 hunters will arrive with darkness. They track by breath and movement. Remain silent. Do not cough, sneeze, or pace. The meat hook descends from above. Stay away from the attic door and all air vents. Remain in the center of your chosen room until you hear the bells. The Red Bishop's arrival. When heavy bronze bells toll from your roof, the judge has come. Retreat immediately to the silent shadow. The crawl space beneath your stairs. Cover yourself with the black cloth left there. Do not look at the Red Bishop's face. Do not answer if he speaks your name. He will make his judgment. If you've honored the compact, he will leave. If you've failed, he will take his tax. The blessing. If you survive until sunrise touches the chapel spire on December 25th, the shoes on your porch will be filled with silver ash. Take 1 pinch and place it on your tongue. You will receive a year of perfect health and extraordinary fortune. Warning. Breaking any rule voids the compact. The lads are not bound by mercy or negotiation. They are the ancient hunger beneath Christmas. They are what remains when joy is stripped away. I'm not proud of what I thought after reading it. I thought, this is elaborate. I thought, someone put time into this. I thought, if it's a prank, it's a cruel one. Then I looked out at Hollow Creek through the trees. at those dark houses and that white steeple, and I realized something that chilled me more than the words on the parchment. The town wasn't acting like a town setting up a prank. It was acting like a town preparing for a storm it couldn't stop. Over the next 2 days, I did what I always do when something doesn't make sense. I gathered information, quietly, without drawing attention. The first time I drove down the main road into Hollow Creek, I saw exactly 3 people. All of them moved with that efficient, head-down posture you see right before a wildfire hits a community. No wasted motion, no conversation, no eye contact. One carried plywood. One carried bags of what looked like salt. One carried a bundle of something wrapped in cloth. There was a general store with a faded sign that said closed, but the door wasn't locked. Inside, the shelves were mostly empty. Not looted. Just bare, like they'd never been stocked. There was an old register on the counter and a bell beside it. I didn't ring it. I looked at the dust patterns and the cobwebs and the faint footprints in the flour dust on the floor. Somebody had been in recently, but they were careful. Everything in that town felt careful. I walked to the church, the white chapel. The steeple was real, older than the rest of the buildings, built from stone instead of wood. The door was shut. No wreath. No nativity scene, just a plain door with a metal latch and, above it, a small bronze bell fixed to a beam. Not decorative, functional, the kind you use to call people in for emergencies. The bell was tarnished, dark, like it had been handled by a lot of hands. I tried to open the door. It didn't budge. On the side of the chapel there was a plaque, half covered in grime. I wiped it with my glove. The inscription was too eroded to read completely, but I caught a few words: compact, visiting December, and a date from the 1800s. I walked back toward the cabin, and my radio crackled once. One sharp burst of static that almost formed a syllable. Then nothing. That's when I knew this wasn't a normal dead zone. Dead zones don't tease you. They just are. That night, I called the deputy again by driving up a ridge until I caught a sliver of service. It took an hour, and the cold was cutting. When the call finally went through, the deputy answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting. "You see it," he said. "I see something," I replied. "I don't know what it is." "You staying?" he asked. I looked back down at Hollow Creek from that ridge. A town without lights. A black pocket in the snow. The cabin behind me in the trees. 13 little shoes sitting on the porch edge like a line of teeth. "I'm staying," I said, and I hated myself a little for it. Pride. Stubbornness. The ranger part of me that doesn't like backing down from unknown terrain. "Then listen," he said. "If you're there during the dew nights, you do what they tell you. You do it exactly. You don't improvise. Don't make it about you." "Who's they?" I asked. He didn't answer. Not directly. "County will not come," he said. "Dispatch will not hear you. Your radio won't work. If you break rules, it becomes a recovery. And I'm telling you right now, I'm not bringing my guys in there on Christmas morning to pick up pieces." His voice cracked on the last word. "Just a little. Enough." I drove back down to the cabin with my jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt. December 21st and 22nd passed with a kind of slow dread that I've only felt before major incidents, wildfire shifts, body recoveries, major storms. The waiting is its own enemy. Your mind fills in blanks with worst-case scenarios because worst case is a kind of control. It's preparation. And if you're wrong, you get relief. If you're right, at least you weren't surprised. The cabin did its normal cabin things. The radiator clanked. The floorboards creaked. The dripping in the walls kept time. I wrote in my notebook out of habit. Times. Temperatures. The fact that no birds were present. The fact that there were no animal tracks around the cabin except my own. That should have been impossible. Even in winter you see mice, rabbits, deer. There was nothing. The snow around the cabin was blank like paper. On the afternoon of the 22nd, I found something under the back step. A strip of black cloth, folded neatly, tucked where it wouldn't blow away. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it until my eyes ached. The parchment had said it would be beneath the stairs in the crawl space, but there it was, already present in the environment like someone had staged it. I backed away and went inside and washed my hands even though they weren't dirty. That's the kind of thing people don't put in reports. The small compulsions that show you're not as steady as you want to be. By the morning of December 23rd, the cabin felt like a place holding its breath. The town did too. I saw figures through the trees moving between houses, boarding windows, checking locks. Not normal winter prep, not casual, clinical, efficient, like soldiers readying for battle. At around noon, I tried my radio again. Nothing. I tried the county frequency. Nothing. I drove up the ridge again for service and got none. It was like the dead zone had widened, like the boundary of whatever this was had expanded because the due time was approaching. I came back to the porch and looked at the 13 little shoes. They were exactly as Mrs. Gable had placed them, in a precise line along the porch edge. The snow around them hadn't settled on them the way it should. They were dry, clean, like the weather didn't touch them. I did something I'm not proud of then either. I reached toward them without thinking. Not to touch, just to test, to see if my hand would feel anything. Before my fingers got within an inch of the nearest shoe, the air changed. The hair on my arm lifted. It felt like the moment before lightning strikes. A pressure shift so subtle you'd miss it if you hadn't spent years noticing subtle shifts. I pulled my hand back like it'd been burned. Sunset in winter comes early. By 4:30, the light was draining from the sky, turning the birches into black scratches against gray. The temperature inside the cabin dropped sharply, like someone had opened a door to the outside and left it open. The radiator stopped clanking. The dripping in the walls ceased. Even the cabin's little noises went silent. That's the thing I want you to understand. When you work around old structures, you learn their sound. They settle. They breathe. They talk. When a house goes silent, it's either because it's empty, or because something is listening. Through the window I saw lights come on in distant Hollow Creek houses. Not Christmas lights, not warm porch lamps. Single harsh white bulbs positioned like searchlights. Figures moved behind curtains in jerky, efficient motions. Nobody looked outside. Nobody stood in the yard. The town went to ground. I forced myself to follow the rules because once you've read a procedure that's specific, your brain starts treating it like a safety protocol. Whether you believe in it or not, you don't casually violate something that reads like it was written by people who've seen consequences. I went into the kitchen and prepared a meal. I didn't have much. Bread, cheese, canned soup, some instant noodles. I chose grilled cheese because it was greasy and simple. Butter in a pan. Bread. Cheese. The sizzle sounded too loud in the silence, like gunfire in an empty valley. As I cooked, I kept glancing at the windows. The forest had become a wall of shadow. Not romantic, hostile. Like it would swallow light if it could. I ate standing at the counter because sitting felt too relaxed. The butter grease splattered across the stovetop. The pan coated in cooling fat. Normally I'm meticulous about cleaning. It's not about being neat. It's about not attracting animals, not creating hazards, not letting a small problem become a big one. But the parchment had been clear. Do not wash your dishes. Leave all grease exactly where it lies. So I left it. The dirty pan on the counter. The plate with smears of melted cheese beside it. The stovetop with a thin sheen of fat around the burner. It felt wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. Like I was breaking my own rules, and that's always when you get hurt. Full darkness fell. The silence thickened. The air felt viscous, sound dampening. Even my own breathing sounded like an intrusion. I moved into the living room because the parchment said to stay there until dawn. I turned off most lights and left one lamp on low. Not to see better, but because I wanted something that felt normal. I sat in the sagging armchair, hands on my knees, and I waited. At first there was nothing, just the cabin's stillness and the pressure in my ears. Minutes crawled, 5, 10, 15. Then I heard it. A distinct clack from the porch, wood striking wood, like someone had picked up one of the shoes and set it down again. Clack. Another. Clack. The sound was steady, rhythmic, like a patrol. They weren't trying to break in. Not yet. They were positioning, listening, waiting for a mistake. One set of footsteps stopped directly above me. I heard a soft, dragging sound, like metal or bone drawn across wood. Then the groan of old structure under pressure. They were testing. In the smoky dim, I could make out the ceiling beams. Solid. Ancient. Nothing visible moved, but the weight overhead made dust drift down in lazy spirals through the sage haze. The footsteps resumed. Minutes passed. My legs ached from holding still. The muscle in my left calf threatened to cramp. I wanted to flex my foot, to adjust, to move a fraction. I didn't. Then I saw movement at the edge of my vision, low on the wall to my right. Something pale pressed through a gap I hadn't noticed. A knot hole in the paneling, maybe the width of a quarter. Something pushed through from outside. Not a hand. Not an eye. Something that looked like a piece of flesh shaped to inhale. It extended into the room inch by inch, impossibly flexible, tasting the air. It flared. It pulled in smoke. It searched for the signature of me. I stopped breathing entirely, held my lungs still until they burned. The pale thing swiveled slowly, sampling the room. The sage smoke seemed to confuse it, flooding the air with scent and noise in a way that masked my presence. After a long minute, it withdrew, sliding back through the knothole like a worm retreating into soil. That stillness was worse than movement, because now I couldn't track them. I couldn't anticipate. When something stops making noise, it's either gone or it's close. A new sound cut through the silence, the groan of metal under stress. My eyes flicked up despite my discipline. In the ceiling there was an old heating vent covered by a rusted grate. I had noticed it earlier and dismissed it. Now, in the dim haze, I watched the grate sag as something above pushed against it. The screws holding it in place began to give. Creak, creak, pop. One screw snapped free and pinged off into the darkness. The grate tilted, leaving a gap. And from that gap, something lowered itself slowly on a chain. Not a hand, not an animal, an object. Heavy, heavy, cold. A curved piece of metal that moved like bait. It descended to about head height and swung gently in the sage smoke, cutting lazy arcs. It searched the air like a pendulum. I didn't move. If I'd been pacing, if I'd been standing, that curve would have found my throat. That thought landed in my mind with an awful clarity. The rule about not pacing wasn't superstition. It was geometry. The chain stopped. The thing swung and swung. Soft metallic whispers sounded impossibly loud. My lungs screamed. Spots formed at the edges of my vision from holding my breath. Then, slowly, the chain began to rise. Inch by inch. The swinging curve lifted back through the vent and vanished into darkness. The broken grate hung at its angle, but nothing else came down. I let out a controlled exhale so small it barely disturbed the smoke. Drew in another shallow breath that burned my throat. The footsteps overhead resumed. But now, there were other sounds. Breathing. Wet, heavy inhalations from multiple points around the room. Not loud, but close. Surrounding. Circling. I couldn't see through the smoke, but I could hear them testing the air. Pulling in scent. Trying to locate the carbon dioxide of my breath. The sounds moved. One near the window. Another near the door. A third somewhere behind me. Too close. My calf cramped. A white-hot spike of pain shot up my leg. My entire body screamed to jerk, to stretch, to release the muscle. I bit down on my tongue until I tasted blood and swallowed whatever sound tried to escape. The breathing shifted closer to my chair. I felt displacement of air behind my shoulder like someone leaning in. A presence. That intimate closeness you feel in a dark room when someone stands too near. A drop of sweat ran down my temple, tickling unbearably. I couldn't wipe it away. I couldn't move. Through the smoke, a shape appeared in front of me, taller than the others I'd sensed the night before. Broader. Humanoid in outline, but wrong in posture, head tilting at angles neck shouldn't tilt. It paused 3 feet from my chair. I couldn't make out eyes. I couldn't make out features. The smoke kept it vague, but I felt it oriented toward me, like it was tasting the air and finding something it wanted. One more breath from me and it would have confirmation. So I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I didn't exist. The shape tilted once more, then drifted away into the smoke. The breathing sounds receded, moving toward the walls, searching other rooms, testing sealed doors with soft pressure that made the frames creak. Hours passed. Or minutes. Time stopped being useful. My legs went numb. My back screamed from holding posture. My throat burned from sage and from the constant suppression of cough. But I didn't move. Then, cutting through everything like a blade, a new sound began. Deep, resonant, physical, dong, a bell. Not a church bell off in the distance. A bell directly above the house. Dong. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, through the chair, through my bones. Dust fell from the ceiling. The windows rattled. Dong. The foundation seemed to tremble. The sage smoke swirled in chaotic patterns, disturbed by vibrations that felt like they came from everywhere. The parchment's final rule screamed through my mind. When heavy bronze bells toll from your roof, the judge has come. Retreat immediately to the silent shadow, the crawl space beneath your stairs. Cover yourself with the black cloth. I moved. The moment I stood, my legs buckled from numbness. Pins and needles exploded through my calves. Pain shot up my spine, but fear shoved me forward. The bell sounded again, closer in the way sound gets closer when something isn't on the roof anymore but in the structure itself. The tone had weight, authority, like a gavel on the world. I half limped, half crawled across the living room toward the staircase. Beneath it, there was a small door painted the same faded green as the trim. I'd noticed it when I arrived and dismissed it as storage. Now I grabbed the handle and yanked. The door stuck, swollen wood. I yanked again, harder, desperation giving me strength. It gave with a crack that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. The crawl space beyond was barely tall enough for a child. But I didn't hesitate. I dropped to my stomach and pulled myself through, the sage smoke following me like a living thing. Inside smelled of mold and old stone and something buried. The walls were earth and foundation rock. And there, exactly where the parchment said it would be, was the black cloth, folded, waiting. I dragged it over myself as the bell tolled again, so loud it felt like my teeth vibrated. Then I heard something else. Not footsteps like the hunters. Not the light movement of the scavengers. Something heavier. Something that forced itself through spaces that shouldn't allow it. The groan and crack of bricks shifting. The scrape of something fitting where it couldn't. And underneath it all, a sound like breathing, but not human breathing. Like bellows. Like a forge being stoked. Air pulled through something vast. The smell hit first. Ozone, sharp and electric, like air after lightning, so strong it burned my sinuses. Under that, something organic and revolting. Pine needles left to rot in standing water, sweet and putrid at once. The combination was nauseating, wrong. Then came heat, not warmth, not of fire. Dry scalding heat, desert heat, absolute. The kind that leaches moisture from everything. The temperature in the crawl space climbed rapidly. My lips cracked. My eyes stung. Through the small gap beneath the crawl space door, I could see a sliver of the living room. Sage smoke still hung in the air, but it was tinged with an orange glow, as if light itself had become heated. A shadow passed across that gap. Not a human shadow. Too broad. Wrong proportions. A head that seemed too large. Arms too long. The shadow moved with slow certainty. Footsteps followed, heavy, deliberate. Each one shook dust loose from the crawl space ceiling. Not just physical weight. Something else. Finality. Do not look at the Red Bishop's face. Do not answer if he speaks your name. I squeezed my eyes shut beneath the cloth, focused on being nothing. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the crawl space door. The heat intensified until it felt like my skin might blister. My throat tightened with the urge to cough, to gag from the smell, to breathe faster, because the air felt thin and scorched. Then the breathing stopped. Silence. Silence so complete it made the earlier silence feel gentle. Seconds crawled, and then a voice spoke. Not loud, but it filled the space. It resonated in my bones, vibrated in my teeth. It sounded like dry leaves crushed underfoot, like winter itself, given language. Stranger. One word, a classification, not a question. My heart hammered. I did not move. I did not respond. Stranger who follows the compact. Another statement. Another noting of fact. The heat eased slightly. Not gone, but no longer scalding. The breathing resumed, slow and steady, like bellows returning to rhythm. I heard movement away from the crawlspace door. Heavy steps crossing the living room. Furniture shifting as if shoved aside without effort. The scrape of the armchair being moved like it weighed nothing. A pause near the kitchen. A long moment of stillness like inspection. Then movement again. Not toward the front door. Up. The sound of something massive moving upward through the structure. Bricks groaning, air rushing, heat dissipating like a fever breaking. The smell faded gradually, leaving behind sage and the lingering copper rot stain from the first night. I stayed under that cloth for a long time after the house felt normal again because normal had lost its meaning. I waited for dawn, not because I trusted the rule intellectually, because after what I'd experienced, following the procedure was the only thing that felt like control. At some point, the darkness beyond the crawlspace door shifted. Gray light, then paler, then a thin beam of actual sunlight. I cracked my eyes open the smallest fraction and looked through the gap beneath the crawlspace door. The sage smoke had thinned. The living room looked disordered. Furniture shifted. Dust disturbed, but not damaged. No scorch marks, no evidence of heat, nothing that would hold up in court or in a report. I waited 10 more minutes. Then I crawled out. My body felt like it had aged 30 years overnight. Every joint ached. My muscles screamed. My tongue hurt where I'd bitten it. My calf throbbed. I touched my forearm and felt tenderness like mild burns, but when I looked there was only faint redness. I stood and looked out the window through bare trees toward Hollow Creek. The chapel spire rose above the roofs, pale against the winter sky. As I watched, the first ray of direct sunlight crept over the horizon and touched the top of that spire. The change was immediate. The oppressive weight I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying vanished. The air felt lighter. The shadows became normal shadows, not loaded. The house became a house again. Drafty, old, ordinary. I stumbled to the front door and opened it. Cold, clean morning air hit my lungs like salvation. The forest looked like a normal forest, and on the porch, arranged in their careful line, were the 13 wooden shoes, but they weren't empty. Each was filled to the brim with ash that glinted silver in the morning light, like crushed metal, like powdered glass. It reflected light in a way ash shouldn't. It looked alive. My hands trembled as I knelt beside them. The parchment had said, "Take one pinch and place it on your tongue." I should have refused. That's what the rational ranger in me says now. Don't ingest unknown substances. Don't accept gifts from systems you don't understand. Don't participate in rituals. Don't reinforce patterns. But I was exhausted. I was traumatized. And I was staring at something that had held true down to the minute. At that point, refusing felt less like rationality and more like arrogance. I pinched a small amount of the silver ash from the nearest shoe and placed it on my tongue. It dissolved instantly. It tasted like nothing. And then, for a fraction of a second, it tasted like everything. Winter air, summer sun, autumn wood smoke, spring rain. Like my brain was being forced to cycle through a year in one breath. Warmth flooded through me. Not heat, vitality. Clean. Alive. The ache in my joints eased. The throbbing in my calf faded. My lungs stopped burning. The fog in my mind lifted like a curtain. I stood on that porch feeling perfect. Not happy. Not calm. Perfect in a physiological way. Like every cell in my body had been tuned. Like my blood pressure had hit an ideal number. Like my hearing sharpened. Like my vision clarified. Like my body had been granted an efficiency it didn't deserve. I looked out at Hollow Creek. Lights were turning on in houses now. People emerged cautiously onto porches. Not celebratory. Not relieved. More like survivors stepping out after a storm to count damage. Some of them looked toward my cabin. Some didn't. Nobody waved. Nobody smiled. This wasn't a shared community ritual. It was a shared sentence. I drove into town later that morning because part of my job is to document hazards, and part of my stubbornness is that I don't like leaving a place without understanding what killed people there. The deputy met me near the edge of town, parked in an unmarked vehicle like he didn't want anyone to see him. His face was gray with sleep deprivation. "You made it," he said, not as congratulations, as confirmation. I asked him where Mrs. Gable lived. He shook his head. She's not really on the record," he said. That answer made no sense, and I told him so. He looked at me like he was debating how much truth I could handle. He walked me to the sheriff's office, a small building with a faded flag and windows covered from the inside. The sheriff didn't come out. A deputy I didn't recognize stepped into the doorway, took one look at my face, and his expression tightened. He handed me a form, not a report, a statement. It had blanks for my name, my address, my reason for being in Hollow Creek, and a simple line: "No incident observed. No complaint filed. Visitor departed without issue." I stared at it. "I'm not signing that," I said. The deputy didn't argue. He simply held out another piece of paper. It was a psych referral, a recommendation for post-incident counseling and sleep evaluation. No details, no cause. Just a preemptive categorization. Stress response. I've seen that move before. It's how systems protect themselves. If you put someone in counseling, you can later say their claims were part of a mental health episode. You can bury truth under care. I asked for last year's case file, the one the deputy had hinted at. The deputy in the doorway said, "There is no case file." I asked what happened to the Fairchild nephew. The deputy's eyes flicked away. He said, "Accident in the woods, in pieces," I said before I could stop myself. The deputy's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. "You keep your mouth shut," he said. "You take your blessing and you go home." Blessing. He said it like a term everyone understood. I felt the silver ash on my tongue again, even though it was long dissolved. The warmth in my veins felt less like a gift now, and more like a brand. I went back to the cabin and packed. On paper, the rational thing would have been to leave immediately and never return. But as I loaded my truck, something in me hesitated. Not because I liked Hollow Creek. Not because I was drawn to it. Because part of me understood the deal in a way I didn't want to admit. This place wasn't sustained by terror alone. It was sustained by incentive. People endured the due nights because the year afterward was easier, healthier, luckier. The kind of slow advantage that makes you forget what you paid. And then, deeper than that, there was another truth that settled in my gut. The compact didn't just bind strangers for a weekend. It bound the town forever. It bound everyone who benefited. It created a closed system where the town's survival depended on maintaining the rules and maintaining silence. I drove out of Hollow Creek with the hand-drawn map and a feeling like I was leaving a crime scene where the evidence would never be admissible. The GPS returned about 3 miles out. Exactly 3, like someone had measured it. My phone lit up with missed calls. My radio crackled to life with static, and then county dispatch. Suddenly clear. It was as if a switch had flipped. I told dispatch I'd been in a dead zone. I didn't say Hollow Creek. I didn't say compact. I didn't say bells. I drove straight to my district office and filed what I could without sounding insane. I wrote, "Visited Hollow Creek area per interagency contact. Observed anomalous radio dead zone extending approximately 3 miles. Town appears uninhabited during daylight. No immediate hazards documented. Recommends signage for GPS unreliability." That's what I put on paper. What I didn't put on paper was the rest. What I didn't put on paper was that 2 days later, my supervisor called me into his office and told me I was being temporarily reassigned. "For rest," he said. "For your health." He slid a counseling pamphlet across the desk like it was routine. What I didn't put on paper was that I found a line in my personnel file later that month. Exposure to traumatic incident. Monitor for delusional ideation. I've never been written up like that in my career. I tried to explain to the counselor in the most clinical language possible. I talked about sensory anomalies, about environmental silence, about unknown intruders, about bells. I omitted the ash. I omitted the word compact. The counselor listened politely and then asked me how much caffeine I consume, whether I have nightmares, whether I've been under stress, whether I've ever experienced dissociation. Those are fair questions. Those are responsible questions. Those questions also function like a net. Once you're in it, anything you say becomes part of a diagnosis. So I stopped talking. For months afterward, I was healthy in a way that made no sense. Old shoulder pain from a search carry vanished. A scar on my knuckle that had been raised for years flattened. I slept fewer hours and woke rested. My reflexes felt sharper. I caught myself doing things with effortless luck, avoiding accidents by inches, finding lost hikers faster than usual, stumbling onto evidence I'd normally miss. At first, I tried to enjoy it. I told myself my body had recovered because I'd finally rested. I told myself the counseling had helped. I told myself I'd been carrying stress and it had lifted. But every time something went unusually right for me, I thought of 13 shoes filled with silver ash. And every time December approached, my stomach tightened. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I told myself it was a closed chapter. Then, on the evening of December 22nd the following year, exactly 1 year later, I was on patrol in my own district, 10 miles from any town, checking a locked gate before a storm. My radio had full bars. My phone had service, and I heard a sound that didn't belong in that valley. A deep, resonant tone that made my teeth vibrate. Dong. Not close, distant, but unmistakable. My body reacted before my mind did. My breath caught. My hands went cold. The hair on my arms lifted. I stood there in the snow with my flashlight beam shaking and listened. Dong. The sound rolled across the trees like a physical wave, and for a moment the forest around me went eerily still, as if every living thing had paused to listen. I told myself it was a church in the next county, a distant bell carried by strange wind. An auditory illusion. There was no wind. I went back to my truck and drove toward town faster than I should have on icy roads. I didn't radio it in. I didn't want dispatch to hear my voice. When I got home, I checked my calendar. Checked the date. December 22nd. The due nights would start in 24 hours. I didn't sleep. The next day, I received an email from an unknown address with no subject line. The body contained a single sentence. The compact comes due. No signature. No explanation. I tried to trace the email. It bounced through servers and vanished into nothing. That night, I found a small object on my porch. A miniature wooden shoe, palm-sized, crude, worn smooth. Just one. I didn't touch it. I stared at it until my eyes burned. When I finally forced myself to pick it up with gloved hands and turn it over, I saw something carved into the bottom. Not a name. Not a symbol. A number. 1. I understood in that moment, with a clarity that made me nauseous. The blessing wasn't a one-time trade. It was a hook. It made you part of the accounting. I don't know how far the compact reaches. I don't know whether it spreads through towns like Hollow Creek or through individuals like me. I don't know whether the ash is medicine or a marker. I don't know what the lads are in any scientific sense. I only know procedures, and I only know outcomes. And I know this. There are rules in places like Hollow Creek that aren't written in any ranger handbook, but they are enforced more strictly than any federal regulation I've ever carried. I'm telling you this now because I'm older, and because my files have been marked, and because I'm tired of pretending I don't hear what I hear every December. Last night I heard the bell again. Not in the distance. Not across a valley. In my house. Just once. Dong. My porch light flickered afterward. My phone lost service for exactly 3 minutes, and when it came back I had a missed call from a number with no caller ID. No voicemail. Just the record of the attempt. This morning, when I opened my front door, there were 13 miniature wooden shoes lined along my porch edge. I live nowhere near Hollow Creek, and the worst part, the part I can't make fit into any rational framework, is this. My first thought wasn't fear. It was an exhausted, resigned calculation. What do I have in the kitchen that will make enough grease? Because whatever that compact is, it doesn't care what uniform you wear or what boundary line is on your map. It cares whether you're a stranger and whether you've ever accepted shelter under its accounting. And if you're listening to this on December 23rd or 24th, and you're somewhere remote, and your GPS suddenly dies, and the forest goes quiet in a way that makes your ears ring, you need to understand something. It's not a story. It's a procedure. And it doesn't care if you believe in it.